On the 23rd of January, 1916, Airey Middleton Sheffield Neave was born into a prominent family in Knightsbridge, London. His father, Sheffield Airey Neave, serving as an entomologist, and his grandfather descending from merchants who had made fortunes in West Indies trade during the 18th century, before gaining baronetcies through Richard Neave's service as governor of the Bank of England. Young Airey attended St. Ronan's School in Worthing, before transferring to Eton College in 1929, where in 1933 he composed a prize-winning essay analyzing the consequences of Adolf Hitler's rise to power in Germany. The 15-year-old student predicting correctly that another widespread European war would erupt within years. He progressed to Merton College at Oxford University to read jurisprudence, his studies focusing more on traditional student activities, including parties and social clubs, than rigorous academic work. Though a frantic, final semester effort allowed him to graduate with a law degree in 1938 and begin training for the bar. Neave joined the Territorial Army while at Oxford, enlisting in the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry because he believed military service represented a gentleman's duty during rising international tensions, his commission transferring to the Royal Engineers on the 2nd of May, 1938. War's outbreak on the 3rd of September, 1939, mobilized his territorial unit, and he deployed to France in February 1940 with the 1st Searchlight Regiment, Royal Artillery, the posting assigning him to anti-aircraft defenses that proved largely irrelevant during the German Blitzkrieg that began on the 10th of May. The Wehrmacht offensive shattered Allied defensive lines within days, German armored columns racing toward the English Channel to cut off British and French forces from their supply bases and evacuation ports, Winston Churchill ordering the 29th Brigade to defend Calais as a diversionary action that might buy time for the Dunkirk evacuation occurring 30 miles northeast. Neave commanded an improvised infantry unit during Calais' defense from the 21st through 26th of May, 1940, leading soldiers equipped with whatever weapons could be scrounged from abandoned stores and depots because the brigade had deployed with incomplete equipment and minimal ammunition. The Germans surrounded Calais by the 23rd and demanded surrender, Churchill refusing the garrison permission to evacuate and ordering them to fight to the last man to tie down German units that might otherwise assault Dunkirk, where hundreds of thousands of British troops awaited rescue. The defense cost approximately 3,000 British casualties, including killed, wounded, and captured, only 60 soldiers escaping death or imprisonment when the garrison finally surrendered on the 26th after German artillery and Luftwaffe dive bombers reduced much of the city to rubble. Neave was wounded during street fighting when shrapnel struck his side, the injury not immediately life-threatening, but severe enough that he could not continue fighting effectively, and German soldiers captured him as he attempted to reach Allied lines through burning buildings. Wehrmacht troops transported captured British officers to Auflag Jan Neah near Spangenberg in central Germany, a prison camp established specifically for Allied officer prisoners, where the Germans assumed that class solidarity and gentlemanly honor would discourage escape attempts. Neave began planning his first escape within days of arriving at Spangenberg, the 24-year-old lieutenant refusing to accept imprisonment as inevitable fate, and instead viewing captivity as temporary inconvenience, requiring only proper planning and determination to overcome, his attitude reflecting both personal stubbornness and genuine belief that escaping represented a captured officer's duty to rejoin the fight. The defense of Calais represented Churchill's first major military decision after becoming Prime Minister on the 10th of May, 1940. The order to fight without evacuation sacrificing an entire brigade to buy hours that might save the British Expeditionary Force from total destruction. Neave's unit fought from hastily constructed positions in city buildings and streets against German infantry supported by tanks and artillery that systematically reduced defensive strongpoints. The defenders lacking anti-tank weapons, effective against Wehrmacht armored vehicles, and air support to counter Luftwaffe bombers that attacked in waves throughout the battle. The mathematics of Calais' defense were never complicated, because 3,000 British soldiers faced approximately 40,000 German troops from multiple divisions that had been diverted from the Dunkirk approach to eliminate Calais garrison, preventing their rear areas from being threatened. Neave witnessed the collapse of organized resistance as German forces overwhelmed isolated British positions one by one, defenders running out of ammunition or being killed by artillery bombardment that destroyed buildings where machine gun teams and riflemen attempted to hold key intersections. His wounding occurred on the 25th of May, when an artillery shell exploded near his position, shrapnel tearing into his ribcage and causing internal bleeding that left him barely conscious as German soldiers advanced through the rubble and captured survivors. Medical treatment came from German field hospitals, where doctors stabilized his condition before transport to prisoner-of-war camps in Germany, the wound healing slowly over subsequent weeks, while Neave endured interrogation about British defensive plans and unit strengths. German intelligence officers questioned Neave about the Calais operation's strategic purpose because they could not understand why Churchill had refused evacuation for a garrison that had no realistic chance of holding the city against overwhelming German forces. Neave refused to provide information beyond name, rank, and service number as required by Geneva Convention protocols, his stubborn silence earning him several days of solitary confinement in punishment cells, where guards denied him adequate food or medical attention for his wounds. The interrogators eventually gave up and transferred him to Oflag 9AH in June 1940, the journey occurring in overcrowded railway cars, where wounded prisoners received minimal care and many died before reaching their destinations. Neave escaped from Stalag Tutti near Thorn in German-occupied Poland on the 8th of April, 1941, together with fellow British officer Norman Forbes, the pair making it approximately 80 miles toward the Soviet-controlled border before German patrols captured them near the village of Ilo. The Gestapo interrogated both men for several days, threatening execution as spies because their civilian disguises and forged identity papers violated prisoner-of-war protections under Geneva Convention rules that required escapees to remain in uniform. German authorities decided against execution and instead transferred them to Oflag 4C at Colditz Castle in Saxony, a special high-security prison reserved for Allied officers who had proven themselves persistent escape risks at other camps. Colditz Castle perched on a cliff overlooking the town of Colditz and the Mulde River. The medieval fortress transformed into what Germans called a Sonderlager, meaning special camp, where persistent escapers from across the prisoner-of-war system were concentrated under enhanced security. The castle walls rose 7 stories high in places. Guard towers positioned at corners provided overlapping fields of fire across courtyards and approaches, and the facility sat 400 miles inside German-controlled territory, with neutral Switzerland representing the nearest safe destination for successful escapees. Field Marshal Hermann Göring had declared Colditz escape-proof during a publicized visit in 1940. The boast intended to demoralize Allied prisoners by emphasizing the futility of escape attempts from a facility specifically designed to prevent exactly such efforts. Neave arrived at Colditz on the 15th of May, 1941, at age 25, joining approximately 200 Allied officer prisoners, including British, French, Polish, Dutch, and Belgian nationalities who occupied separate quarters within the castle but shared common areas, including a small courtyard where exercise periods were conducted. Life at Colditz followed predictable routines designed to maintain order and prevent escapes through constant supervision, daily roll calls confirming prisoner counts, room searches detecting contraband and escape materials, and movement restrictions limiting where prisoners could go within the castle complex. The tedium drove some prisoners to despair and passive acceptance of captivity, while others, including Neave, viewed the monotony as challenge requiring creative solutions and refused to reconcile themselves to years of imprisonment. The castle housed an escape committee, coordinating various national groups' efforts to prevent overlapping attempts that might compromise multiple operations simultaneously. British officer Pat Reed, serving as escape officer responsible for approving plans and allocating scarce resources including tools, maps, and civilian clothing. Neave studied the castle's layout obsessively during his first weeks, identifying guard routines, noting gaps in security coverage, and observing how German personnel moved between secure and prisoner areas through specific gates and corridors. He became convinced that disguise offered the best method of escaping because attempting to climb walls or dig tunnels invited detection by guards who specifically watched for such conventional methods, while walking out dressed as German personnel exploited the tendency of sentries to give cursory attention to people wearing correct uniforms. If you want to see how Airey Neave walked through the heart of Nazi Germany, dressed as an enemy officer, and made it all the way to Switzerland, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel because it helps us share these forgotten stories of courage that changed history. Let's continue. Neave made his first escape attempt from Colditz on the 28th of August, 1941, disguised as a German non-commissioned officer in a uniform, created from a Polish army tunic dyed green with scenery paint and a cap fashioned from blanket material. He successfully passed the first sentry post inside the castle by walking confidently and saluting properly, the guard barely glancing at him before waving him through toward the gate leading to the outer courtyard. The second sentry examined him more carefully under bright searchlights that illuminated the checkpoint, the intense light revealing that his supposedly field-gray uniform had been rendered bright green by the crude dye job, the obvious forgery prompting the guard to challenge him and summon additional soldiers who arrested him before he could retreat. German security officers interrogated Neave for 2 weeks following the failed attempt, the questioning focusing on who had helped create the uniform and where he had obtained materials, his refusal to implicate other prisoners earning him extended solitary confinement in punishment cells. He spent the autumn and early winter of 1941 planning a second attempt with Dutch officer Lieutenant Anthony Lutain, the collaboration representing typical Colditz cooperation where prisoners of different nationalities pooled resources and expertise to overcome individual limitations. They decided to improve on Neave's first attempt by creating more convincing German uniforms using better materials and more sophisticated tailoring, and by identifying an escape route that would allow them to leave the castle without passing multiple sentry posts under bright lights. The prisoners operated a theater in one of the castle's rooms, where they staged productions to maintain morale and occupy time during long winter evenings, German authorities permitting the activity because it kept prisoners entertained and reduced tensions that might lead to riots or mass escape attempts. British prisoners discovered a trap door beneath the theater stage during construction work, the opening leading to a small room that had been used for storage and sat directly below the main floor where performances occurred. Neave and Lutain realized the room connected to corridors used by German guards, moving between the castle's outer walls and interior prisoner areas, the location offering possibilities for exiting the prisoner section without using standard gates that subjected everyone to close scrutiny. The two officers refined their plan through December and early January, coordinating with other prisoners who would create distractions during a theatrical performance scheduled for the 5th of January, 1942. They obtained better quality gray-green cloth from Red Cross parcels and other sources, prisoner tailors sewing replicated German tunics and trousers, complete with fake insignia and buttons that would pass casual inspection in dim lighting. Neave's uniform identified him as a German lance corporal, while Lutain's represented a Dutch worker authorized to move through German-controlled areas, the dual disguises allowing them to travel together without arousing suspicion that a single German soldier would create when moving alone through checkpoints. The escape began at approximately 9 o'clock in the evening on the 5th of January, 1942, during a prisoner theatrical production that attracted both prisoner audiences and German guards who enjoyed the entertainment despite their duty assignments. Neave and Lutain slipped away from their seats during a particularly loud musical number, crawled through the trapdoor beneath the stage into the room below, and waited until the performance ended and prisoners returned to their quarters before emerging into German corridors. They walked confidently through passages where guards occasionally passed, but paid no attention to what appeared to be a German soldier and a Dutch worker, moving on legitimate business, their forged identity papers ready if anyone challenged them, but nobody bothering to check because their uniforms and demeanor suggested they belonged. The pair exited Colditz Castle through a side gate that led to the town at approximately 10:30 post-meridium, walking down cobblestone streets past German military installations and civilian homes, where lights burned despite wartime blackout regulations. They reached the railway station and purchased tickets to Leipzig using German currency that had been smuggled into Colditz through various channels and saved by prisoners for exactly such purposes. The ticket clerk accepting their story about being transferred to new postings without questioning why a lance corporal and Dutch laborer were traveling together at night. The train departed at 11:45 and reached Leipzig at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning on the 6th of January, the 2-hour journey passing without incident because German military personnel and civilian workers frequently traveled at odd hours during wartime. Leipzig's railway station teemed with Wehrmacht soldiers, SS units, civilian workers, and refugees despite the early hour, the constant movement of people through German transportation hubs creating anonymity that Neave and Lutain exploited by blending into crowds moving between platforms. They purchased tickets to Ulm, using the last of their German currency, the route taking them southwest toward the Swiss border through Stuttgart and other major cities where Allied bombing had not yet destroyed rail infrastructure. The journey to Ulm required approximately 14 hours with multiple stops and train changes, each connection creating opportunities for German military police to check papers and question suspicious travelers. But Neave's confident demeanor and fluent German allowed him to deflect casual inquiries from soldiers who saw only a lance corporal and his companion traveling on legitimate business. They arrived at Ulm on the evening of the 6th of January and walked southwest from the city towards the Swiss border approximately 100 miles distant, abandoning their German disguises for civilian clothes obtained from contacts who supported Allied escape networks, operating across Germany. The journey on foot took 2.5 days through freezing January weather with minimal food because they could not risk entering German towns or villages where their accents and lack of proper documentation would have aroused immediate suspicion. Neave and Lutain crossed into Switzerland near the town of Singen on the 9th of January 1942, crawling across frozen fields in darkness to avoid German border patrols and reaching Swiss customs posts where officials provided food, shelter, and immediate notification to British diplomatic personnel that 2 escaped prisoners had successfully reached neutral territory. Swiss authorities interned Neave and Lutain according to international law, requiring neutral nations to detain military personnel from belligerent countries, but British diplomatic channels arranged their release and transport to Gibraltar through Vichy, France, and Spain. The journey from Switzerland through France required traveling with false documentation, identifying them as Belgian industrial workers being transferred to new assignments, the cover story providing plausible explanations for why 2 men would be moving southwest through occupied territory toward the Spanish border. They crossed the Pyrenees in late January, using established escape routes that Basque guides operated for downed Allied airmen and escaped prisoners. The mountain crossing occurring in winter conditions that made the journey dangerous even with experienced guides who knew safe paths. Neave reached Gibraltar in early February and boarded a military transport to England, arriving in mid-February after 9 months as a prisoner of war and becoming the first British officer to complete a home-run escape from Colditz Castle. The War Office decorated him with the Military Cross on the 12th of May, 1942, for his successful escape and return to Allied territory, the award ceremony occurring at Buckingham Palace, where King George VI personally presented the medal. Military intelligence debriefed him extensively about Colditz security procedures, German interrogation methods, and escape techniques that had proven successful, his first-hand knowledge providing valuable information for MI9, the secret department responsible for assisting Allied prisoners attempting to escape or evade capture. MI9 recruited Neave in mid-1942 to work in room 900 at the War Office, the organization coordinating escape and evasion networks across occupied Europe that helped downed airmen, escaped prisoners, and stranded soldiers reach neutral territory or return to Allied lines. His duties included training air crew in escape procedures before they deployed to combat zones, preparing them psychologically for capture, and instructing them in techniques for evading German patrols if they were shot down over occupied territory. He helped create detailed maps of Colditz and other prisoner-of-war camps that were smuggled to inmates through Red Cross parcels and coded letters, the intelligence allowing escape committees to understand their facilities' layouts and identify weaknesses that might be exploited. The escape networks that Neave supported through MI9 operations helped approximately 7,000 Allied airmen and soldiers return to Britain between 1942 and 1945, the routes running from occupied France and Belgium through neutral Spain and Portugal to Gibraltar, where British transport could evacuate them to England. He traveled clandestinely to occupied France and Belgium during 1943 and early 1944, coordinating with resistance groups operating safe houses and providing forged documents to evaders attempting to reach escape lines. His experiences as an escaper gave him unique credibility when instructing others about the psychological challenges of living under false identities in occupied territory, where single mistakes in language, behavior, or documentation could mean arrest, torture, and execution. The War Office assigned Neave to the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg in 1945, tasking him with investigating German industrialists who had supported the Nazi war effort and profited from slave labor programs. His legal training at Oxford and fluent German made him ideal for reviewing captured documents and interrogating witnesses about corporate collaboration with SS concentration camp administrators who provided Jewish prisoners and other captives as forced laborers for German industry. He served the formal indictments to Nazi leaders, including Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and other defendants in their cells at Nuremberg prison in September 1945. The accused showing no visible emotion when receiving charges documenting their roles in starting aggressive war and implementing genocide. Neave later wrote that meeting the Nazi leadership face-to-face impressed him with their ordinariness. These men who had orchestrated the murder of millions appearing as bureaucratic functionaries rather than theatrical villains, the banality of evil evident in how they discussed mass murder with clinical detachment. Only Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel showed military bearing by snapping to attention when receiving his indictment, the gesture representing habitual discipline rather than acceptance of guilt for war crimes. The Nuremberg experience convinced Neave that institutional evil required individual accountability that hiding behind orders or organizational hierarchies could not excuse participation in crimes against humanity. He left military service in 1946 and returned to practicing law while becoming increasingly involved in Conservative Party politics, his war record providing credibility with voters who valued military service and personal courage. Neave stood for Parliament in Thurrock constituency during the 1950 general election, but lost, though he won a by-election in Abingdon constituency in June 1953 and would represent the area in the House of Commons for the next 26 years. His parliamentary career proceeded modestly through the 1950s and 60s, serving on committees dealing with foreign affairs and defense, but never achieving ministerial appointments despite competent performance. A heart attack in 1959 limited his political advancement because doctors advised reducing stress, the medical setback occurring at age 43 when he might otherwise have progressed to junior ministerial positions. He remained a backbencher through the 1960s and early 70s, watching younger colleagues advance past him while he focused on constituency service and committee work that kept him engaged without requiring the intense schedule that ministerial duties demanded. His political fortunes changed dramatically in 1975 when he managed Margaret Thatcher's campaign to unseat Edward Heath as Conservative Party leader, the successful effort-earning Neave appointment as head of Thatcher's private office and Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. The Irish National Liberation Army targeted Neave because his shadow portfolio for Northern Ireland and his known hardline positions on Republican terrorism made him a symbol of British policy that Inlay opposed through violence. The organization had split from the Provisional IRA in December 1974 over strategic disagreements about pursuing political objectives versus maintaining armed struggle. Inlay adopting more extreme tactics, including assassinations of British political and military figures. Neave had advocated abandoning containment strategies in Northern Ireland in favor of military operations aimed at defeating Republican paramilitaries, his public statements attracting Inlay attention as someone whose elimination would send political messages about the costs of hardline policies. Inlay operatives attached a magnetic car bomb to Neave's metallic blue Vauxhall Cavalier while it sat in the House of Commons underground parking garage, the device incorporating a mercury tilt switch that would trigger detonation when the vehicle drove up the exit ramp and changed angle. Neave started his car at approximately 2:59 post-meridium on the 30th of March, 1979, following a day of parliamentary business that included voting on a confidence motion against James Callaghan's Labour government. The bomb exploded as his car reached the top of the ramp, leading from the parking garage to street level, the blast occurring at exactly 2:59 when mercury in the tilt switch completed an electrical circuit, detonating approximately 5 pounds of commercial explosives packed beneath the driver's seat. The explosion tore through the vehicle's floor and roof, the force severing both of Neave's legs and causing catastrophic internal injuries, emergency responders finding him still conscious, but trapped in the wreckage with his face burned beyond recognition. They extracted him from the destroyed car and transported him to Westminster Hospital, where surgeons attempted to stabilize his condition. But blood loss and internal trauma proved too severe, and he died at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 hour after the attack. He was 63 years old, having survived imprisonment at Colditz, escaping across Nazi Germany, working in occupied France, and serving at Nuremberg only to die in a terrorist attack outside the British Parliament. Inlay claimed responsibility for the assassination within hours, the organization's statement declaring that Neave's death represented retaliation for British policies in Northern Ireland and warning that other political figures supporting military solutions would face similar fates. Margaret Thatcher, who would become Prime Minister 7 weeks later when Conservatives won the May general election, described Neave as one of freedom's warriors and stated that he was staunch, brave, true, strong, gentle, kind, and loyal. The timing of his death 2 days after, the no-confidence vote that brought down Callaghan's government, and weeks before the Conservative electoral victory, meant Neave never served as Northern Ireland Secretary, despite having been designated for the position. The assassination generated conspiracy theories that persist decades later because Neave's death occurred at a politically convenient moment for various interests, and his hardline positions on Northern Ireland had created enemies across the political spectrum. Some theories suggested British intelligence services killed him because he planned to expose corruption within MI5 and MI6, while others claimed the CIA orchestrated the attack to influence British policy toward Northern Ireland in ways favorable to American interests. His widow Diana received elevation to the House of Lords as Baroness Airey of Abingdon following his death, the honor recognizing both his service and providing her with parliamentary role and income that partially compensated for his loss. The fundamental question about Airey Neave's life involves understanding how a comfortable upper-middle-class lawyer became first an escape artist who walked out of supposedly escape-proof Colditz, then an intelligence officer supporting resistance networks, then a war crimes investigator at Nuremberg, and finally a politician assassinated by terrorists. The answer likely combines personal courage developed through military service with analytical intelligence that allowed him to identify weaknesses in apparently secure systems, whether German prison camps or political establishments. His success at Colditz demonstrated ability to observe patterns, exploit gaps in security, and maintain composure under extreme stress when detection meant death, the same qualities that served him in MI9 operations and political campaigns. The escape from Colditz on the 5th of January, 1942, represented calculated risk rather than reckless gamble because Neave had studied German security procedures through 8 months of observation and identified specific vulnerabilities in how guards processed people moving through checkpoints. His decision to walk out in disguise, rather than attempting to climb walls or tunnel, demonstrated tactical intelligence that conventional military training might not have provided. The lawyer's analytical approach identifying that people see what they expect to see and rarely question individuals who appear to belong. The 400-mile journey across Germany to Switzerland required similar qualities of coolness under pressure and ability to project confidence that discouraged closer examination, skills developed through upper-class British education that emphasized maintaining composure regardless of internal stress. Neave's MI9 service extended his escape expertise to helping thousands of Allied airmen and soldiers evade capture or escape from prisoner of war camps, his personal experience providing credibility when instructing others about psychological preparation necessary for living under false identities in occupied territory. The work involved coordination between British intelligence services, resistance networks across France and Belgium, and neutral countries willing to facilitate transit of escaped military personnel, the complex organization requiring diplomatic skills and ability to work across cultural and national boundaries. His Nuremberg service represented different application of similar analytical abilities, reviewing German corporate records to document how respectable businesses had collaborated in war crimes and genocide while maintaining facades of legitimate commercial activity. The assassination that ended his life occurred because he had translated wartime courage into political positions that made him a target for organizations willing to use violence against democratic processes. His advocacy for military solutions in Northern Ireland creating enemies who viewed terrorism as legitimate political expression. The fact that he survived German captivity, Gestapo interrogation, and dangerous intelligence work only to die in a terrorist attack outside Parliament demonstrates that courage cannot protect against determined enemies with access to explosives and willingness to murder. Neave's legacy extends beyond his specific achievements to represent a type of British public servant who combined establishment credentials with genuine courage and willingness to risk everything for causes they considered worthy. The tradition of gentleman warriors who moved easily between military service, intelligence work, and politics. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives, so if you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Also, let us know where you're watching from by dropping a comment with your city or state, because we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.